So it's all in here. This is koala poo. I'm not sure how much you can see, but there are a few pellets here, and there is so much information that we can obtain from these pellets. My side of the story is that basically we have analyzed the poo, and we are trying to look at the cortisol chemicals in this poo. So what happens is when we are stressed, we release cortisol and other hormones, and the cortisol, once it's injected in the blood, if you want, from the body, it goes through the system and then ends up in your poo. While it goes through your system and ends up in the poo, it goes through a process that is called metabolism. And this process produces these metabolites, which are basically chemicals of these hormones. And the chemical that we are looking for is something like similar to cortisol, but more elaborated. So we have identified what chemicals there are for cortisol in one of the phases of this project. Now the second phase was about the baseline of these cortisol metabolites, which are these chemicals. And what we are trying to do is to measure the levels. Actually, what we have done is measure the levels of this baseline. So the baseline is the normal levels that animals should have when they're not stressed. What we need to do is measure these levels, which we have done, and then we will compare to levels that we find in the wild when koalas are having their normal lives. So we are trying to understand if certain situations that are out there are actually stressing koalas, and we do that by analyzing the feces. Well, habitat clearing is one of the problems with koalas that is causing, we believe, it causes stress, because if you clear the habitat, koalas need to roam around much more than they would if there were trees. So they look, for trees because that's where they live. They are so-called folivores, which means that they eat only leaves of certain species of eucalyptus, and which means that they have to find these eucalyptus trees. And to look for these eucalyptus trees, they need to wander around. Now, if they wander around, they have to cross roads, so they get road killed. They go in backyards because sometimes that's where the trees are, and they get eaten by dogs or chased by dogs, and that causes a lot of stress. Stress is also linked to an increase in diseases. So it's well known that when a person, as well, a human, is continuously stressed, they can become ill, severely ill. And the same thing can apply to koalas. So we need to establish if there is a link between cortisol metabolites, which are these chemicals, stress, and increase of diseases. We know that one of these diseases that affects koalas is chlamydia, and has got an incredibly high mortality. So if there is a link, we need to find out and probably go and talk to governments, state and federal, and explain that there is a link between stress, so habitat clearing, stress, and diseases. Ultimately, what we want to see is that habitat is protected, that not all habitat in urban areas is cleared. At the moment, a great percentage is cleared for roads, for housing, which we know, we understand, it is humans need to live somewhere, and humans also need to move around. But we also need to protect the habitat of this species, which is endemic of Australia. So it's unique to Australia. It's a flagship species, it's an umbrella species, which means that if you protect koalas, you protect many other species because you keep the habitat healthy. So many other species will survive, of animals, and us as well, of course, because we breathe air. So, and oxygen comes from trees. So there is a link, it's a holistic approach.